incentive gained so much, she wished there was a way to make it.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good day from New York. We're coming on the air because President Biden is about to deliver an update on the rapidly escalating crisis in Ukraine. It comes after President Vladimir Putin of Russia ordered troops into separatist-held regions of Ukraine. The White House is now calling that plan an invasion. There are the two regions where Putin says he will send so-called peacekeeping forces. They are Russian-speaking areas which have been ruled by pro-Russian forces for years. The administration has long made clear there will be severe consequences, mainly economic sanctions on Russia if it invades, and the White House this morning stated that any movement into this region would constitute an invasion and trigger an American response. We want to go to NBC News Chief White House correspondent Kristen Welker. Kristen, do we know what the president will talk about in this briefing?
Well, Lester, we are expecting President Biden to announce new sanctions, and I'm told these sanctions will be targeted toward Russia, and they've been coordinated with allies and partners. Now, on Monday, you may remember that President Biden imposed limited sanctions. Democrats and Republicans have urged him to go even further in the wake of those sanctions. The White House pushing back, though, saying that essentially they are holding the toughest sanctions to try to pressure Putin not to invade even further. So that is why they're not going full bore with these sanctions. Now, as you mentioned today, the administration is using the term invasion. That is a shift in its rhetoric. It is using that strengthened term after Monday night. Administration officials stopped short of saying it was an invasion. So, Lester, what changed? Well, effectively, according to two top officials here with whom I spoke, they determined the word invasion was appropriate after assessing Russia's actions on the ground and, of course, those peacekeeping missions that are moving in. And Lester, here's the president.
All right, Kristen, thank you.
Try and make up your mind, huh? Well, good afternoon. Yesterday, Vladimir Putin recognized two regions of Ukraine as independent states. And he bizarrely asserted that these regions are no longer part of Ukraine and their sovereign territory. To put it simply, Russia just announced that it is carving out a big chunk of Ukraine. Last night, Putin authorized Russian forces to deploy into these regions. Today, he asserted that these regions are actually extend deeper than the two areas he recognized, claiming large areas currently under the jurisdiction of the Ukraine government. He's setting up a rationale to take more territory by force, in my view. And if we listened to his speech last night, and many of you did, I know, he's setting up a rationale to go much further. This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, as he indicated and asked permission to be able to do from his Duma. So let's begin to, I'm going to begin to impose sanctions in response far beyond the steps we and our allies and partners implemented in 2014. And if Russia goes further with this invasion, we stand prepared to go further as with sanctions. Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a flagrant violation of international law and demands a firm response from the international community. Over the last few months, we've coordinated closely with our NATO allies and partners in Europe and around the world to prepare that response. We've said all along, and I've told Putin to his face more than a month ago, that we would act together. And the moment Russia moved against Ukraine, Russia has now undeniably moved against Ukraine by declaring these independent states. So today, I'm announcing the first tranche of sanctions to impose costs on Russia in response to their actions yesterday. These have been closely coordinated with our allies and partners and will continue to escalate sanctions if Russia escalates. We're implementing full blocking sanctions on two large Russian financial institutions, VEB and their military bank. We're implementing comprehensive sanctions on Russia's sovereign debt. That means we've cut off Russia's government from Western financing. It can no longer raise money from the West and cannot trade in its new debt on our markets or European markets either. Starting tomorrow and continuing in the days ahead, we'll also impose sanctions on Russia's elites and their family members. They share in the corrupt gains of the Kremlin policies and should share in the pain as well. And because of Russia's actions, we've worked with Germany to ensure Nord Stream 2 will not, as I promised, will not move forward. As Russia contemplates its next move, we have our next move prepared as well. Russia will pay an even steeper price if it continues its aggression, including additional sanctions. The United States will continue to provide defensive assistance to Ukraine in the meantime, and will continue to reinforce and reassure our NATO allies. Today, in response to Russia's admission that it will not withdraw its forces from Belarus, I have authorized additional movements of U.S. forces and equipment already stationed in Europe to strengthen our Baltic allies, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Let me be clear. These are totally defensive moves on our part. We have no intention of fighting Russia. We want to send an unmistakable message, though, that the United States, together with our allies, will defend every inch of NATO territory and abide by the commitments we made into NATO. We still believe that Russia is poised to go much further in launching a massive military attack against Ukraine. Hope I'm wrong about that. Hope we're wrong about that. But Russia has only escalated its threat against the rest of Ukrainian territory, including major cities and including the capital city of Kyiv. There are still well over 150,000 Russian troops surrounding Ukraine. And as I said, Russian forces remain positioned in Belarus to attack Ukraine from the north, including warplanes and offensive missile systems. Russia's moved troops closer to Ukraine's border with Russia. Russia's naval vessels are maneuvering in the Black Sea to Ukraine's south, including amphibious assault ships, missile cruisers, and submarines. Russia's moved supplies of blood and medical equipment into position on their border. You don't need blood unless you plan on starting a war. Over the last few days, we've seen much of the playbook that Secretary Blinken laid out last week in the United Nations Security Council come to pass. A major increase in military provocations and false flag events along the line of contact in the Donbass. Dramatically staged, conveniently on-camera meeting of Putin's Security Council to grandstand for the Russian public. And now political provocation of recognizing sovereign Ukrainian territory as so-called independent republics in clear violation, again, of international law. President Putin has sought authorization from the Russian parliament to use military force outside of Russian territory. And this set the stage for further pretext of further provocations by Russia to try to justify further military action. None of us should be fooled. None of us will be fooled. There is no justification. Further Russian assault in Ukraine remains a severe threat in the days ahead. And if Russia proceeds, it is Russia and Russia alone that bears the responsibility. As we respond, my administration is using every tool at our disposal to protect American businesses and consumers from rising prices at the pump. As I said last week, defending freedom will have cost for us as well and here at home. We need to be honest about that. But as we do this, I'm going to take robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, not ours. We're closely monitoring energy supplies for any disruption. We're executing a plan in coordination with major oil-producing consumers and producers toward a collective investment to secure stability in global energy supplies. This will blunt gas prices. I want to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. In the last few days, I've been in constant contact with European leaders, including with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Vice President Harris met in person with the leaders in Germany over the weekend at the Munich conference, including President Zelensky. At every step, we've shown the United States and our allies and partners are working in unison, which he hasn't been counting on, Mr. Putin. We're united in our support of Ukraine. We are united in our opposition to Russian aggression, and we're united in our resolve to defend our NATO alliance, and we're united in our understanding of the urgency and seriousness of the threat Russia is making to global peace and stability. Yesterday, the world heard clearly the full extent of Vladimir Putin's twisted rewrite of history, going back more than a century, as he waxed eloquently, noting that, well, I'm not going to go into it, but nothing in Putin's lengthy remarks indicate any interest in pursuing real dialogue on European security in the year 2022. He directly attacked Ukraine's right to exist. He indirectly threatened territory formerly held by Russia, including nations that today are thriving democracies and members of NATO. He explicitly threatened war unless his extreme demands were met. And there's no question that Russia is the aggressor. So we're clear-eyed about the challenges we're facing. Nonetheless, there is still time to avert the worst-case scenario that will bring untold suffering to millions of people if they move as suggested. The United States and our allies and partners remain open to diplomacy if it is serious. When all is said and done, we're going to judge Russia by its actions, not its words. And whatever Russia does next, we're ready to respond with unity, clarity, and conviction. We'll probably have more to say about this as it moves on. I'm hoping diplomacy is still available. Thank you all very much.
Are you still open?
President Biden taking no questions as he lists the latest reaction and punitive measures aimed toward Russia for its essential declaration of two areas of a sovereign Ukraine as separate countries. I want to go to Kristen Welker right now. Kristen, big headlines there. More U.S. forces pouring into the Baltic areas in a defensive posture, and also the announcement of new financial sanctions.
That's right, Lester. I thought those were the two largest headlines. First, to the fact that they are sending more equipment and more forces to the Baltic region of Europe. This is significant. This is an escalation. The president was very clear. This is a defensive posture, and they have consistently said they have no plans to actually move into Ukraine. But make no mistake about it, Lester, this is significant that they are sending more troops and redirecting them to that region. Then on the sanctions, you heard the president say, look, these are tougher sanctions. These are going to be imposed and directed at financial institutions as well as elites and oligarchs in Russia. Then to the pain that Americans may be facing. Of course, the country right now dealing with record high inflation and gas prices. The president talked about ways that he plans to mitigate all of that. The other headline I would note, Lester, is the final point that the president talked about, diplomacy. He said he hopes there's still a diplomatic resolution on the table. I have been talking to administration officials throughout the day. They say that window is closing rapidly. And of course, Secretary of State Blinken is set to meet with his Russian counterpart on Thursday. I'm told that that meeting is in jeopardy. And of course, that meeting is the precursor to a potential meeting between President Biden and President Putin. So that meeting clearly in jeopardy as well. But the president not closing the door to diplomacy. It's clear, though, Lester, the window is closing by the minute.
Yeah, the president saying the next move is prepared. In other words, he's willing to respond toe-to-toe with whatever Vladimir Putin does in those countries. We should note that the U.S. is prepared to move forces into to help defend those NATO allies, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. I want to go now to NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel, who's on the ground in Ukraine. And Richard, one of the areas of some misunderstanding or perhaps lack of clarity was what territory specifically and how far out it would be that Russia was now claiming as independent.
So last night, Vladimir Putin announced that he would recognize these two areas, two breakaway republics that are part of Ukraine. But then today, just a few hours ago, Putin explained exactly what he meant, what the boundaries would be of that area that he's recognizing. And you've pulled up a very important map, and I think it's important that people understand this map because potentially the future of Ukraine depends upon it. You see the pink portion of the map. That is the area that is held currently by Russian-backed separatists. There are no Ukrainian forces in there. The Ukrainian government does not have control. And initially, when Putin said he was going to recognize these two republics, both of which are in that pink area, it didn't seem potentially that it could be the trigger of a war, because Putin was just announcing that he was recognizing an area, giving protection to an area that Russia already controls. But then Putin today said, no, it's not just that pink area. It is the provincial boundaries of that region, which is the brown, much larger area that you show on that map. And that brown area, which is where I am right now in the city of Mariupol to the south, is controlled by the government, is controlled by the Ukrainian military. There are a lot of Ukrainian troops here. Large portions of the Ukrainian military are based in this section of the country. So if Putin were to go beyond areas that are controlled by separatists, it would mean that Russian forces and Russian-backed forces would be coming into direct military combat with the Ukrainian army, and then we're talking about a conventional war. And once conventional war begins, then it's an easy scenario to see how it could extend across this country.
All right, Richard Engel, thank you for that. And joining us from Moscow is NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons. And Keir, is it clear what the next move is now by the Kremlin?
Well, Lester, as you can hear over me right now, there are fireworks here in Moscow, unrelated to President Putin's announcement today, but somewhat ironic. In terms of your question, we know what President Putin thinks, but we don't know what he plans or when he plans to do it. And just going back to what Richard was saying there, the big question is whether President Putin envisages that he will allow some time to expire, maybe just a matter of days, and look for some kind of a conflict to break out in that now newly disputed area, disputed by Russia only, of Ukraine, and then say that he has to move on more of Ukraine in order to defend that area and in order to defend the separatists there. Lester, I was talking to one official at the Russian Foreign Ministry just tonight here in Moscow. He was saying that he believes that meeting between Minister Lavrov and Secretary Blinken seems unlikely now. The threat of sanctions, Lester, has not deterred President Putin, and diplomacy has not deterred him. The question tonight is, what will deter him?
Keir Simmons, thank you. On that note of diplomacy, let me bring in our NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent, Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, we heard Kristen describe her sources saying the window for diplomacy is closing. Is there some hope here by the U.S. that if Putin goes no farther than he is now, that may be a diplomatic win?
I think right now they think that he's already gone too far to call this a diplomatic win. He has not been deterred by exactly what has just been described by Richard Engel. He's gone beyond those borders, those outlines of the separatist regions. And in fact, as the president just said, who in the Lord's name gave him the right to take two parts of a sovereign country and declare them as independent countries? You know, what he has done now has just taken territory from Ukraine and saying today that he will take even more. So, no, I don't think that they can, and I think that they now feel there's no point in a Lavrov meeting because it would just be more propaganda. The Secretary of State was supposed to leave tomorrow morning for Geneva. We were, of course, also going, and now it could still be a trip. There could be a trip to Brussels in another day or so, or to Paris to talk to allies, to just ratify the unity of NATO that they have truly put together. And my experience in Munich with them this weekend was that the allies really are on the same page in a way that they have not been, even though it is a new German chancellor, even though the French president is up for re-election, even though the UK prime minister is in political trouble back home. On this, they are united, and they are united behind America. So they've done a good job on this. These sanctions are going to be incremental, but the most severe, to my eye, is the sovereign debt. If Russia cannot go to the well of international finance, they have to figure out other ways to finance their own projects. That will hurt. That's not just that's sovereign. That is sanctioning the government's resources, the assets, and being able to trade within the international finance system.
Yeah, and worth noting, the president saying this is the first tranche of sanctions and that they are prepared for next and follow-on moves. Thank you, Andrea. I want to go back to Richard Engel now, who is in Ukraine. Richard, it's one thing to make this announcement that they're going to move in peacekeeping troops. Have we seen anything, any indication of extraordinarily Russian movements in that area?
So for the last several weeks, we've all been watching the overt Russian military buildup, the tens of thousands of troops that it has in Belarus, along the eastern border, in the south. But we know much less about Russia's troop presence inside the separatist area, that pink area on your map that is controlled and has been controlled for years by the separatists. Last night, Putin said that he would move peacekeepers into, that was his term, Russian troops to serve as peacekeepers to protect the people there at a time of his choosing. He didn't say when they would go in, but shortly after that announcement, some unmarked vehicles, some unmarked military vehicles were seen entering from Russia into the area. And then earlier today, the chief of NATO said that Russia had been building up its troop presence in that separatist area.
Richard Engel, thank you. That concludes our coverage of President Biden's remarks. We'll have much more as events develop tonight on NBC Nightly News. For now, I'm Lester Holt, NBC News, New York. Good day.
Get back to